International Center for the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property in Italy, right? Or you are based here?
No, I'm based in Rome.
No, you are based in Rome. You specially came here.
Yes.
So we are very delighted to have you here. Hopefully your presentation has started from Italy and will arrive here very soon.
It should be. It is on the computer.
Okay. So can we get the Dr. Heritage presentation? But that's a very special name. Maybe tell us a bit more about it. So while we get no, but this is wonderful.
Ah, there we go.
There you go.
We've got the. I'll tell you about my name later.
Okay, no problem. Okay, Alison, with your
Good,
wonderful smile,
Thank
make
you.
it more and most interactive.
Okay, can we put these slides to full screen, please?
Wonderful. No technology hiccup.
Is it possible to go to full screen?
Should be.
No, they haven't done it yet. So I can move it on. Not yet? Yeah, no, it's coming. Full screen? Can you put it full screen, please?
Okay.
No.
Can you put
Can
it on slideshow? Seems like we need to move from Industrial Revolution 3 to 4.0.
Um, that's it.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Already there.
Is it there? Yes. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I will try and not take too much time. First of all, I would like to say a very deep thank you for the kind invitation to attend this meeting. And I also bring with me my greetings from our Director General, Dr. Ndora Weber, who sadly was not able to be here today, but I hope that I will provide an adequate substitute for him. I just wanted to start off to say just a few words. I'll be talking about the work of ICROM. Oh, excuse me, it seems to be jumping ahead. Can we go back there? Thank you. I just wanted to start off to say a few words about ICROM, what we are, what we do, since you can't start with any assumptions. It's important. So just quickly to say, we're an intergovernmental organization. We were established by UNESCO some 60 plus years ago, and we're based in Rome, in Italy. Our mandate is we're dedicated to promoting the conservation of cultural heritage worldwide. And really, we work in the service of our member states, of which we now have 137. We're delighted to have the adhesion of Costa Rica, most recently in the last few weeks, to join us. So that's really wonderful news. So really, truly with a global outlook. And I also just wanted to say a brief word about the governance and the structure, because really we do serve our member states, and therefore it is through their engagement that really determines the direction that we take and the way in which we work. We have a General Assembly, which will be taking place actually at the end of this, no, go back. It's quite jumpy. At the end of this month, and to which the member states attend, but also we're very keen to invite any countries who also wish to attend as observers who are not currently member states, and that would also be Indonesia. So we'd be most happy to receive other delegations. And really the way in which to get more involved in ICROM is also especially through the role of the Council, because the General Assembly elects the Council. They're a body of 25 people approximately who set our strategic directions for the next 6 years. And also importantly, they select the Director General, who then of course directs the Secretariat. Our mission is to provide member states with the best tools, knowledge, skills, and enabling environment with which to preserve their cultural heritage. And our vision, I think, is very much in line with the theme of this conference, really to strive for a world in which cultural heritage really is able to contribute to progress inclusivity and well-being. We've been in operation for over 60 years, and of course a lot has changed in that time. And I also just wanted to say a little bit about what we do. We are primarily a capacity building organization. We're very well known for doing training, but we also provide information, we do research, we always work through cooperation, and we also do advocacy. In 60 years, I'm sorry, I'm having to turn around because it's not on the screen here.
If you feel more comfortable, you can stand up. Not to you.
I'm fine. Well, I might actually. That could be a bit easier. Thank you. Sorry. It's better. Okay. So, well, let's go back. In 60 years, what has it added up to? Well, we have trained over 8,000 professionals from 196 countries. We've produced over 324 publications in 12 languages. We have a really excellent conservation library. I would say it's probably the best in the world, with more than 124,000 catalogued items in over 70 languages. So we receive researchers from all over the world who come to use our library. And of course, we have an incredible network of institutional partners. Just in 2018 alone, just to give you an idea, we've run 28 international courses, which have involved 594 people in 111 countries. We provide advisory services, we also produce publications, and of course, we are continually adding to our library and growing its collection. Now, of course, as a IGO, we are very committed to the Sustainable Development Goals and firmly committed to promoting the role of cultural heritage within that. And our commitment is particularly in relation to Goal 11, but obviously, given the cross-cutting nature of culture, we also contribute to many other different goals. And I think this is really important always to keep in mind, because this is really how we align our program to the SDGs. I just wanted to say a word, though. This is really, really important. We've heard a lot about that in the previous session. We really are in a time where we're facing global challenges. This is a snapshot from the recent demonstrations by Extinction Rebellion in London. And let's go back. And really, in times where we're facing real existential threats to humanity, we really do have to think about the role of culture within that. But this really depends, I think, on, and particularly when we're talking about cultural heritage, we really do have to think, what is heritage? What is heritage to different people? And I'm not going to answer that. Certainly not in the space of 20 minutes. But I think this is really what has to drive us, particularly when we're talking about cultural diversity. Of course, and we heard about this in the previous talks, and this has been demonstrated through the conventions of UNESCO from 1973 through to 2005, that there are really shifting perspectives of what heritage is, starting off with a very more classical, I would say, materials-based perspective, right the way through to things that maybe some people don't consider as heritage. This, of course, as many of you will recognize, is Banksy. Things that maybe aren't even intended to be permanent, they're ephemeral. Whether or not you conserve these sorts of things, and many other expressions of culture and heritage. This is really up for debate. Similarly, too, within cultural heritage conservation, we have had to change dramatically the ways in which we think about and the ways in which we act within conservation. Moving from a very materials-based approach with materials science, we call it the appliance of science, focused on the object, through to much broader perspectives, really taking into account people, nature, and culture, and seeing this very much as an integrated system where culture is shaped by and is shaping the environment in which we live. I also then wanted to talk a little bit about, when we're talking about diversity, it is clear that this comes through engaging people and talking with community. And this is the words of Weber and Doro, saying conservation Conservation today is linked to social and economic development and sustainability. Civil society, local communities, indigenous peoples and religious groups have all increased their engagement with the conservation of cultural heritage. For ICROM, this means that our training, advocacy and dissemination should embrace and promote diversity and people-centered approaches, and that is really the key phrase, I think, here. When we're talking about community, the wider the community, obviously the more inclusive the impact. And so really it does come down to involving people. But this is easier said than done. I mean, I think we have heard some very inspiring talks before about the need for inclusivity and the importance of cultural heritage in our lives. I think, though, the question as to how you actually go about doing that, these are the things that ICROM really focuses on. And really, we're talking about practical means for doing that, practical tools and methods for how you actually go about making sure that you include people. I'll give you one tiny little example of the sort of work that ICROM is doing, really working at the grassroots level to develop new tools for doing that. This is an example from Georgia, which was really to try to take a new approach to cultural mapping, because quite often when we go in as cultural heritage experts with our questionnaires and our questions, quite often the case is that communities don't fit into the boxes that you've already created, and therefore it's much better to find a different way where you start more with a blank sheet. And this was a method working with sociologists to try and gamify that process, to bring creativity and more openness, reflection, and really for the cultural heritage experts to stand back and see what comes out. Of course, then we try and build these types of approaches into our training courses, and we do a lot of work through the World Heritage Leadership Program to incorporate people-centered approaches in the conservation of nature and culture, so seeing this in a very holistic way. And of course, especially in training, we do training courses also for cultural heritage in times of crisis, natural disasters, conflicts, things like that, where really cultural sensitivities and awareness of that really must come to the fore. And I think you only really achieve that through having a very aware and nuanced approach that is based on being able to incorporate different perspectives in very practical ways. I would say also that what comes out of our training courses we share through publications, really practical manuals that we make available freely online, because it really is about sharing knowledge. But I'd also say that sharing knowledge isn't just about dissemination. Sharing knowledge is really about being aware of knowledge. It's about having respect for knowledge, different types of knowledge, and really trying to incorporate those in your own way of working. And really this does require, when we're working interdisciplinary, that we step out of our comfort zone, and that we really look at what other people know and can bring to the table. We try and do this through all our training courses. These are just some activities that are coming up in the next year or so. For example, looking at things like wood conservation technology, you can see we have participants from all around the world sharing knowledge, traditional knowledge, scientific knowledge. The idea here being, though, that through international cooperation, and we heard the wonderful example of batik as a wonderful metaphor for international cooperation, really so that we can, through that, find common approaches to common problems, but then really translate those down to a local level where they are interpreted at a local level in a way that is meaningful. And so another good example is the paper conservation. Here we have a course on Japanese paper technology in Latin America. Paper is fairly ubiquitous. I think really also speaking to supernatural powers and the gods of technology, we really need to engage and harness these to create open knowledge systems. This is really where we must go. And we've all heard of open science and things like open access, open data, open education. This is really important. I would argue, though, that while this, all this knowledge that we see here is absolutely vital, the only thing really that is going to get us through that door to solutions is open collaboration. And this really is, I think, a very strong message that we need to take good note of. And really what we're talking about is interdisciplinary collaboration, trying to get things that seem completely different to work together in one system. And we place a lot of focus within cultural heritage. Conservation is really about bridging the research-practice divide. This is but one example. And I'd say the classic example is where you're going from material science through to material practice. But of course, I think we are talking about much broader types of science. As I mentioned before, the input of human sciences, sociology, psychology. These are really, really valuable for us. This is also where we need to increase our idea of what is heritage science. It's wonderful to have a science named after you. But, okay, I will be fast. Because it's through that we can really start to answer some of the really big questions we have about what is heritage and what it means to people. And I'd really say that in terms of knowledge implementation, this is absolutely vital, because knowledge is only useful knowledge if it is used, and therefore it has to be accessed, it has to be understood, and it has to be applied. One of the key problems we face, I think, is that cultural heritage is an area that is data-rich, but we exist in the data gap because it's not connected. This has implications in all sorts of areas, and I find it very interesting that at the same time we have a parallel session on data science. And the possibilities are enormous now, but really within our sector we are still struggling with the most basic things. ECROM recognizes that, and also as part of our research work, we do things like mapping things. This is a map of research networks over the last 20 years, looking at co-authorship. And immediately, I would say doing these kinds of things, it doesn't answer questions, more to the point it raises more important questions that lie beneath the data. Look at those distributions. You see the incredible connectivity in some areas of the world, and you see the lack of connectivity in other areas of the world. This is what we're talking about when we mean inequalities in the knowledge economy, which I think is absolutely laid bare in this one image. We also do things like trying to map training programs. This is an ongoing work. You can see that we haven't yet covered the Asia region. Again, as I say, it's because it's painstaking work. It's hard to do to gather this data. We need your help. We need the countries to come forward and please share with us your data if we're going to be able to get an overview, because we need a strategic overview in order to be able to cooperate better and really address some of the global concerns that are affecting us. Well, I think, of course, we all accept the connection between heritage, well-being, and sustainability, that heritage is an experience, it's a way of life, and it's interrelation between livelihood and identity. But the really important thing, I feel, that we are missing, what we are really missing, is being able to translate that into evidence of what heritage actually contributes. We all know it contributes. Heritage is ubiquitous. You know, it's a bit like, you know, we don't have to wonder where our feet are. We know that they're at the end of our legs. I think for sometimes this also means that heritage is taken for granted, and we tend to neglect its fundamental role in everything that we do. But we do need better evidence. And particularly when we're starting to talk about things like well-being. Well-being shouldn't just be a nice notion. It has to mean something very concrete. We need to be very clear about what we mean by well-being. And I think the developments in New Zealand just recently are extremely encouraging to actually see this taken on by a national government for shaping the national budget. But we really need to work harder, I think, engaging with economists. And it was very, I think, interesting to hear the speaker earlier who's talking about economic models. And I was really thinking, how often in cultural heritage do we talk with economists and really start to try and put these points to them as to where heritage fits into and culture fits into things like this. And so then I will just wrap up really, really quickly and say, why is this important? It's really important because we need to make use of what works. And that really involves, certainly for culture and for cultural heritage, identifying within that what really works to promote social outcomes. And not just paying lip service to that, using that evidence to improve policy, but also really importantly to improve practice, heritage conservation practice, so that really heritage can fulfill its true potential in terms of making people's lives better and making the world a better place. And I just want to say thank you.
So we have now an excellent example from Alison to stick to time and give you excellent ideas. Please note down your questions because this time technology is helping us and we are in Industrial Revolution 4.0 already. So we will continue with the other two presenters and then we will have some time for questions and I would say interactions. So with that, we request our next speaker, who would like to go next? Let me check. Is it Baba?
My name is Basuki. His name is Basuki.
Oh, Basuki. Wrongly written.
Yeah.
Baba Suki, then your turn. 20 minutes again. You have a PPT as well.
Yes.
So let's see whether you stick to time. Like Alison.
Good morning, all participants. I think what I'm going to say will make me a lot of enemies, because when people talking about sharing history, about sharing cultural heritage, I'm going to say something about private property, intellectual property.
You are safe here, no problem.
So, waiting for the PPT. I would like to. Actually, I just would like to give you some insight about what is happening today, relating to the efforts of protecting cultural heritage through intellectual property, particularly traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. First of all, I would like to say, okay, I really believe with all of you that culture would make people live happier rather than being purely capitalists. But then we also think that to safeguard or to protect cultural heritage, to some extent we need huge financial resources to do that. And then when we see the Cultural Diversity Convention itself, the previous speaker this morning, Pak Hariwalyo, has explained us that it is not yet. Sorry? No. Me too. I don't know how to. I'm not an expert in IT. Not that one. Not that one. The other one. Yang ada gambar. Okay. Okay. To okay, that's no. This is not mine. This is Pak Idam. The last one. Ya. Tadi udah ada Mas itu bisa di itu. Yang tadi sudah betul. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, okay. The slideshow, please. Okay. I hope it works. Okay. This is my presentation, and so, okay. Can I use it? Oh, sorry, that way? I don't know. How can Alison do that and I can do? Do you have any special words? Sorry? Next. Okay. Thank you. Thank God. Okay. If you see the phrases in yellow, you can see that even in the UNESCO Convention 2005, we have talked about traditional knowledge as material wealth, and we talk about intellectual property rights. So, unfortunately, even in UNESCO, we talk about private property, intellectual property. So, what is happening today is that there is a specific forum talking about the effort to efficiently protect TK and TCEs as intellectual property. We call it IGCGR-TKF, Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore. We have discussed about this for nearly 20 years, and we haven't reached any outcome yet. But in this occasion, I would like to share with you some information that perhaps could give you, could enrich your perception, so we can consider how to make this become successful without having to make us become more too purely capitalistic. So, okay. First of all, I would like to share with you that, in fact, there is an economic value of the TK and TCs. You can see it there. And even there is some legal case, even in Indonesia, if you follow the case number 3, there was a case between Indonesian with Balinese silversmith with a private company that creating and selling silver jewelry. The case is that this company used traditional motifs, but they then claim as their intellectual property, a copyright. And then when this Balinese, actually he was the employee of this company, create the same motives, then the company sue him. But I heard that our local court has rejected the company's claim. So why? Because it has been said that this silver jewelry using motifs in their silver jewelry, which is actually traditional motifs, Balinese motifs. So this is the case. So we can see that there is legal cases that relating to economic value of this traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. And also, if you see the last one, there is a case in the United States where one of the most famous Indian warrior, Crazy Horse, has been his face has been turned into a label or a trademark for liquor, malt liquor. So the descendants of the Crazy Horse sued to the court because it has been a derogatory to the Crazy Horse because during his life, Crazy Horse never drink any alcohol and never persuade any Indians to do that. So it's we call it it's like an insulting trademarks for the traditional communities. So through these cases and information, we can see that there is an economic value of TK and TCS. So we cannot deny that. Okay, we can. I don't know about others' point of view, but if we see this, we cannot easily say that. Okay, we share our culture to anyone who wants to use it because there is some conflict of interest. So I would like to share with you that I think when we see the intellectual property concept, I think most of us misunderstand about the principles, the basic principles. If you see the philosophy of IP, intellectual property, it's not a concept that forces us to completely be, having a capitalistic mind, because even the expert, let's say the expert who creates the first theories of intellectual property, like John Locke with his law of nature theory, he said that he didn't accept if we try to have an excessive property. So you can see in my paper, if you want to, that even when we try to protect something with IP, there is a limitation that it must not be excessive. But and why then? If people ask then, why then we need IP regime for this? So some experts say that having an IP regime would make us safeguard and protect this cultural heritage or something that we have in an efficient and professional way. What is the meaning of this? Is that because if we are given an ownership of something, that we are more responsibility to do that. If we don't have something as an incentive, so I think most of us would not say, oh, I don't have any interest with that, so I don't care about that. So that's the philosophy of the IP regime. And then, actually, this is the last slide of my presentation, but I would like to give you more explanation about this. As now we are still negotiating the international agreement about protecting TK and TCEs as IP, we have to negotiate many principles in that. So I show you some critical issues that have been discussed in the IGC context. Some people say that when we talk about TK and TCEs, people say, so who is going to be protected? Country, state, or intellect, or indigenous people and local communities? So I suggest that we should try very hard to find the indigenous people and local communities who really has the right to such TK and TCEs first. Secondly, we are also debating about the definition, and we have to say that the definition of this TK and TCE should be flexible. Why should it be flexible? Because even between countries, there are some says that culture is not culture can culture cannot be blocked by administrative boundaries. But at the same time, we have to see, like this previous speaker, Pahari, said that there is an original culture that grow only in one place, not in other place. In my paper, it is shown too about some experts' views about that. So we have to have a flexible definition. So any countries could make their own quote-unquote definition that is in compliance with their needs. The third, as I have said before, we have to carefully identifying the beneficiaries, because if you are wrongly determine the beneficiaries, so there will be conflict of interest. Indonesia is also vulnerable to that because we have hundreds of ethnic and sub-ethnic groups. For example, I had an experience when some people from Java said that batik is from Java, and then others from West Java said, no, it's not from Central Java, but also from West Java. So this is a delicate issues that we should anticipate. Fourth, when we talk about TK and TCE's protection as IP, we will always talk about term of protection. And because TK and TCEs generally created by anonymous, generally, and it has been there for a long time. So people, it's difficult to determine when we are going to protect it or how long it will be protected. So I think we have to be careful when we talk about this, because in my opinion, there is no company who is going to pay royalty for the rest of their life or until or infinitely. So we have to discuss this in depth later on. And we also see that living heritage should be protected, although they are not documented. So we know that a lot of TK and TCs are orally transmitted. They are not well documented. But IP regime requires that if you are going to be protected, so you have to document. You have to have a documented or something should be documented. For example, if I say that I have an idea about one thing, so people will ask, why don't you write it as a book? If I don't have any book, then, for example, Pak Idam would say that, oh, I have the same idea like yours. It's not your exclusive ideas. This is the problem of trying to protect TK and TCEs as an IP. That's and then I just would like to highlight some role of tourism in developing, let's say, cultural heritage in let's say, revitalize or rejuvenate TK and TCEs. I think tourism has a role to promote TK and TCEs. For example, if you see a lot of souvenirs are made from, for example, one local areas that has become the icon of these areas. To some extent, it can rejuvenate pride for IPLs, for the IPLCs, because they will see that, okay, that's mine, that's ours. So and a lot of people know about it. A lot of people use it or buy it. So it's ours. So they will feel that their TK and TCEs is useful and known by others. And in some countries, there is a policy, not directly tourism policy, but policies regarding to selling of souvenirs, selling of fake souvenirs. So they are trying to protect IPLC products by using unfair competition policy if there is companies or sellers who sells fake souvenirs, which is similar to the IPLC's products. So I think this is what all of that I know in the last the discussion about IP protection to IP regime to an effort to protect TK and TC in IP regime. Thank you very much.
Now we have the legal aspects, intellectual property, and the economic value, all of that. So now we will have our last speaker, Mr. Ifac. He's an expert in the Indonesian spice routes, right?
Right.
And has been helping UNESCO, especially on the World Heritage nomination. So again, in your capital and responsibility.
Okay. Can I have my presentation, please?
That's a big question.
Let's start with the question. Okay, while we're waiting, I'm reading. Everywhere in the world today, culture is on the rise. We advance culture for the well-being of all, not just some privileged members of society. What is to be done and where to begin in order to create a global society where the well-being of each becomes the precondition for the well-being of all? How should we envision heritage in 2030 and the steps to achieve the targets? These are the terms of reference of our discussion today, as I was told. Well, is this wishful thinking? Clearly, there are various obstacles, and more often than not, they stem from the dynamics between cultural stakeholders. There are obstacles between policymakers and communities. But what happens when communities become the policymakers? In the field of heritage, it has happened. Let's talk about heritage. Let's talk about Borobudur and continue from there. The restoration of Borobudur was completed in 1983. A community paved the ground for the conservation work. It was not an international community, but not a global community of tourists. Neither was it the community of donors, governments, corporations, and individuals, although they're here in Borobudur are commemorated in stone. It was a community that preferred leadership over ownership. In 1967, the international scientific community of the International Congress of Orientalists held its first congress in the USA in Ann Arbor. At that congress, Professor Sukmono, Indonesian's leading archaeologist at that time, asked the community of the International Congress of Orientalists to urge UNESCO towards restoring Candi Borobudur, and he was successful. But conservation actually started in the late 1960s, but however, the conservation work quickly became a government project. Candi Borobudur became an object of heritageization, an object of the past that was deliberately restored to become an asset for the future. Investment was the keyword at that time. Promoted was the image rather than the being of Borobudur. Sadly, in this process of heritageization, the local community of Borobudur became detached from the monument of mankind, a being that was the center of a number of fairy tales. Now, fairy tale is another keyword I want to highlight, and what I want to talk about is a fairy tale of science. Recently in Indonesia, scientists came under attack for producing histories of the 7th century kingdom of Sriwijaya. Fairy tales, they said. But perhaps this is not a singular incident. For all over the world, it seems that the scientific community has lost its leadership when it comes to things of the past and things of the future. To be sure, there once was a community of scientists that aimed to lead on the global scale. This was the International Committee of Intellectual Cooperation, or the ICIC, with Albert Einstein, Marie Sklodowska-Curie, and Henry Bergson, Henri Bergson, actually, as three of its 12 founding members in 1922. Eventually, this committee became the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or in other words, ICIC was the forerunner of UNESCO. A recent dissertation showed, these are the founding members, there are actually 12, here no, only 6. But a recent dissertation showed that ICRC was actually more a community of spirit. Einstein, Bergson set the differences about the nature of time aside and joined hands with Curie and other leading scholars in developing a program of science and education with the vision of a culture of peace in mind. That was already in the 1920s. But the real work was done by the International Bureau section of the Secretariat of the League of Nations. This was ICIC campaign for the advancement of culture. It was Yotaro Sugimura, director of this section, who translated culture of peace to become the purpose of the World Organization was not to mold all nations into one, but to effect a bricolage in which each color played an important role. It is in this way that the advancement of the culture of peace became the safeguarding of cultural diversity. It was intellectuals such as Sugimura, who was a doctor of laws, fluent in several languages, a judo athlete, and also a good swimmer, in addition of being a career diplomat, who realized the vision of the giants like Einstein and Bergson and so on, and translated that spirit into action. So these people from this bureau, from the International Bureau section, were actually people who translated and then came up with the programs and so on. Now let's see what's happening in today's UNESCO's action. Just an example. The Silk Road is a UNESCO project which celebrates the historical corridor of intercultural interaction that paved the ground for the development of the modern world economy. UNESCO has established the International Network for the Silk Road online platform in Bangkok. Here, out of 23 contact points, only 7 or 30% are scientists or academicians. This is the map of the Silk Roads they came up with. Sorry, this is quite small, but it shows a very different map has been rendered by Indonesian archaeologists, more complex with main and subroutes. This difference may seem trivial, but comes most likely from the paradigmatic bias that has guided research and policy in the past. This bias is responsible for the lack of attention to Southeast Asian agency, including Indonesians. This bias is also responsible for the questionable emphasis on empires, kings, and kingdoms, as well as ports and port policies. It is questionable for most of the trade that crisscrossed the rivers, seas, and oceans of Asia was conducted by ordinary people. Ships and prahus were built by ordinary people. And the captains and sailors even there were also ordinary people. Of course, there's a problem of reconstructing the spice routes of ordinary people, not kings. For they rarely left notes, letters, and inscriptions. But this is a methodological problem, and the Association of Critical Heritage Studies, among others, has been working to overcome this problem. One way is to bring ordinary people into the circuit of knowledge production, and several global initiatives have started to do so. A few examples, for instance, the Maritime Asia Heritage Survey, based in Oxford. This group has been documenting places of heritage important to people who live in or around the places of heritage in the Indian Oceans. Interestingly, this survey has brought Acehnese to digitally document heritage sites in the Maldives. And they plan to go further. They already contacted the Director General to cooperate to do the similar things here in Indonesia and beyond, in the Philippines and so on. The Indian Ocean Research Group is even a step further, having bases in Adelaide, Perth, and Delhi. This group publishes the Journal of the Indian Ocean Regions and had a successful research project on regionalism. But it seems that since 2015 they have not been that active. And then there's also the Sea Links project in Jena, in Germany. Based in the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, this project is multidisciplinary, but aims to study the earliest maritime connections that linked up and gradually transformed societies around the Indian Oceans. Connected to this project is Pak Warumuno Mahdi, an Indonesian who has been residing in Europe for many years, but he's a linguist also, studying ancient languages connected to maritime connections. So why I'm mentioning these global initiatives when I want to talk about heritage in 2030? By now, it should be obvious that I'm actually talking about knowledge production. I believe that knowledge production should get a boost. We need a new set of concepts, highlights, and champions of heritage to inform the process of heritageization. We need new circuits of knowledge to reinstate the message of culture of peace which lies at the heart of global cultural conservation. This has been done to some extent. For instance, Indonesia brought, during Europalia Indonesia in 2017, we brought shipbuilders from Bulukumba in South Sulawesi to La Bouverie Museum in Liège in Belgium, and where they presented not only the ship that they built, the Padawakang, but also presented the technologies behind it, the philosophy. It is with intellectuals like these, actually, that we should go forward to facilitate people, ordinary people. I mean, they are intellectuals, but they are also sailors, farmers, and so on, to bring them to a global platform, to interact at a global stake. So that interest, this was the most successful exhibition for Europalia Indonesia. 400,000 people attended, came to watch Padewakang and how it was built. I mean, it's important to generate interest. And interest is important because it generates knowledge production. Thank you.
We have three wonderful presenters. You have heard Dr. Allison about ICROM, the global program and how it came out of UNESCO, and the science of heritage science. That's wonderful. And also how these networks evolve and how do we create knowledge and data, and also the relativity of these networks and who is doing what. That's wonderful. And then our dear Pa Basuki, sorry I said Bagus, but you are Bagus also. So Dr. Basuki, you have given us very wonderful ideas about the intellectual property. And it has raised, I'm sure, many questions in the minds of people. Like when I was listening to you, so we share heritage. Like, for example, I wear batik, but to whom this intellectual property really resides with? And also you gave this crazy horse example. So inappropriate use of symbols and the heritage and what can be the discourses for that. So that's very interesting. And then you just heard our dear Dr. Idham about these spice roots and this scientific allusion to the reality. So from fairy tales to realities. And really it must be very difficult to construct these realities, because who are those people, who are the communities, who are the intellectuals which need to be consulted? And if we want to create interest, then it's not only the select few, the scientists or the people from archaeology who can create this history or the knowledge about it. So it's about communities. But who are those communities whom we should consult with? So these are all very interesting areas. And please also remember two wonderful presenters this morning who have given us ideas about the, first of all, what is the DNA of heritage? And then very importantly, the economic aspects by Dr. Daud. So we have those ideas with us. And also you heard before from the perspective of His Excellency Vice Minister as well, which was about the role in a community like ASEAN to create harmony through culture and have a culture which is of not harming anyone. And all those ideas are here. Now we have time, precisely 30 minutes, and 1 minute to run away from here. So you can let your imagination go in the cultural dimensions. And there are more than one ways to ask questions. You can write it down. I don't know whether the technology is working or not. If you want to express yourself in Bahasa Indonesia, most welcome. So you can speak in Bahasa Indonesia, which will be translated. But we need to make sure that at least two of us know you can help. And Alison, we will turn you into an Indonesian. So, who would like to take floor? But please keep it focused. And the focus is 2030 agenda, how do culture helps, how we cross boundaries, and how these knowledge networks come together, and what is the role of science, role of understanding, role of communities, how do we make sure the culture is owned by all the communities. So all those ideas, let's explore them a bit further. Who is going to start? Okay, so rule number 1, introduce yourself with a smile. Smile of non-harming, and then ask your question, and you can direct your question or it can be generic. So we take 3 questions at one time, so that then we can have a dialogue. So the beautiful lady here.
Selamat pagi.
Yeah.
Good morning. Saya Buena Flor Cruz, Kebudayaan Attaché dari Kedutaan Philippine. I'm Buena Flor Cruz, Cultural Attaché of the Philippine Embassy in Jakarta. I have a question for Bapa Basuki. How far or where is Indonesia now in terms of protecting TKs and TCEs, especially to popular tourist destinations in Indonesia? Thank you.
Okay, and the next question. Follow the great example and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Daryl. I'm a consultant in cultural management. First of all, I think we can agree that in terms of advancement in culture, we can agree that there are 2 important concepts. First, the protection and promotion of cultural heritage, and the second, the protection and promotion of cultural expression. My question is, which type of cultural product and services should we advance? What are the clear guidelines? Are there any goals that we agree should supersede diversity? For instance, peace or human rights, maybe? Or maybe the sovereignty of each country to uphold their national values? Or should diversity be protected and promoted for the mere sake of diversity? This is a question maybe that has been postponed, has not been answered, I think, for more than 14 years. So I think maybe it's time for us to have a clear understanding of what cultural product and service should we advance. For context, let me share with you one example. For instance, in Indonesia, we have a very famous culture performance named Reog Ponorogo. They claim, the traditional performers, they claim that in order for the main actor to perform accordingly for hours, they need the original blood and also the skin of a tiger for the spiritual power for the main performer to what do you call it, to perform for hours. Now my question is this the type of, also the type of culture that we should protect and promote? So that's just an example to give context to my question. Thank you.
Very tough one. Okay, we have 2 and maybe a third question, then we will start to have. Okay, I hope I'm not blind to any spot. So the lady here, and maybe next time the colleagues on this side.
Okay. Hi, my name is Valencia. I'm from Jakarta. So my question is, because I was just from the other side where they speak about big data, because the future is about the monetization of data. So how would you see, as as people who are collecting data, what are the threats of data? Are we going to fight over data in the future? Like if the data is collected by like a foreign institution, and actually the data belongs to the data that is collected is Indonesia, how do you see the future of this?
Okay.
I don't know, I tried to formulate it, but I'm still
3
confused myself.
questions. Maybe the first one was clearly to you, Basuki. So maybe you make a start while others think how to defend themselves.
I'm committing crime here. Okay, thank you. Frankly speaking, I don't have enough information about that. But some of our regulatory measures has clearly given provided protection to the TK entities. For example, we have a Copyright Act that stipulates that TCE is protected by the state, and we have also Patent Act who stipulates that benefit sharing of the use of traditional knowledge by third parties is regulated by the states. And also there is, for example, in the trademark also, there could be a cancellation of trademark if there is a similarity with traditional knowledge of traditional cultural expressions. But if you ask me about the detail about the data in particular, moreover, particularly in the tourist destination, I cannot give you any answer right now. That's, I think that's the first.
So there are laws at the national level, but going to the specifics may need more local understanding of the local law and the customs and all of that.
Yeah.
And so the clear answer is to me that maybe you can have the conventions, the national laws and policies, but for protecting the culture and enhancing, you need to go to the local level as well. So Alison, maybe you want to add?
I had a little question for you actually, and I'm not as expert in this. Funnily enough, my brother is actually a trademark lawyer, so I wish he was here. But my question is, what possibilities are there for really simple tools that communities can use to protect, their what is unique and special about their local knowledge? I was thinking of things like, the example of Creative Commons comes to mind as a really useful thing that is so available and easy. How do you see the development of things like that?
Thank you, Alison. Yes, there is still always a debate about that, common creative and the intellectual property. But for the time being, if we are going to, let's say, persuade indigenous people as local communities to protect their uniqueness, the one that tools that can be used directly is using geographical indication concept, because geographical indication is about actually it's more related to mostly related to the to the agriculture products, but has a specific a characteristic that cannot be done or cannot be used in other places. That's it.
So we can go across disciplines and borrow knowledge, like on germoplasm and the indigenousness of that. So Alison, why don't you give us some ideas about fight over data? And you have a big gap in, there must be somebody fighting, that's why you're not getting the data. We have a wonderful program in UNESCO, you know about the memory of the world? And that's also fighting with each other as well. So data is not so easy.
No, it really isn't, and it's also a big question as to what sorts of data
It's
we're
not an
talking
easy
about.
one, yeah.
No. And in fact, actually, I was also just connecting a little bit to what you were talking about. I mean, the person who asked that question, the immediate thing I was thinking about a lot of these digital preservation projects and scanning, and then who actually owns that 3D scanning data at the end of it, and these are big issues that are really coming to the fore. And I think that the cultural heritage sector really has to find better ways of addressing that, and also better ways to prepare communities and custodial organizations when entering into those negotiations, also with the private sector. It's really controversial, and I sense the arrival of lawyers.
Somebody has to make a living.
Yeah, But really also with respect to data, and I would like again to connect it to what the other talk, thank you, that was also talking about in terms of intellectual outputs and knowledge production. And at the moment, really, this is a huge problem, I think, within the scientific community, because although we have open access, we're really going from, a pay-to-view to a pay-to-say model. And I think also that the research that we did, just looking at the international literature, I know it's not exhaustive, it was just supposed to give an indication, but it really does show the massive inequalities in the sharing of knowledge. And that's important because it shapes our, how can I say, epistemological blind spots. You know, if really things are just being blurred out by knowledge production from certain parts of the world, and it's overlooking that, which I think was precisely the point that you were so eloquently making. And so I would really, maybe I'm not answering the question of data too well here, but I think it brings
it's about a
so
dialogue
many
as well,
issues,
because there are many
we talk about what
specifics.
types
And
of data, so I think really we do have to think about how, again, what practical ways can we find to ensure that those other types of knowledge and other types of viewpoints really are shared and shared openly, and confronting this big problem, I think, with publishing houses and what's the word for it?
Data archives
factors.
and,
Yes, and how we can open that up.
And who opens that debate and who owns, So maybe we continue to move with Dr. Idham. It's not specific for you, but this question that we need for our culture, maybe a bit of blood of a tiger, and we need to have a few other parts of the ritual, but it's very important, it's part of the custom. And there are many issues, especially with our world natural heritage. So there are maybe sometimes some conflicts as well. How do we reconcile those conflicts, and how do we continue? That's a very, very important question. And where do we go? And also the issues related to peace and issues related to reconciliation. So you have any ideas? Especially in Indonesia, you have wonderful experience with world natural heritage, like of Sumatra, tropical rainforest heritage of Sumatra, and we have been looking into all the laws at different levels, and it's so hard to reconcile. So maybe with your experience.
Thank you. Whether cultural diversity should be über alles over all other interests, well, I would say that cultural diversity is a fact. It is there, whether you like it or not. You can exaggerate it, you can minimize it, it's still there. It's even in the Quran. So it's beyond discussion. I mean, it is there. It's a fact. It's a fact of life. Whether we want to acknowledge it, that's another question. In order to acknowledge it, what we need, your question, whether it is right for a tradition to kill tigers so that then they can perform their ritual, that is a matter of debate. And it's not a matter of policy, in my opinion. It has to be debated, and what's needed is a platform to stage this debate. I mean, bring in the environmental concerns, bring in human rights concerns, but create this platform. That's exactly what law number 5 of 2017 is doing. Protecting the right by creating platforms, rather than policing traditions, policing people, what to do, what not to do. But give them the right to exchange views in a safe place, in a safe environment, so that then not one can impose his or her views on the others, especially when it comes to cultural diversities. Even in Ponorogo, you said Ponorogo about reok. In reok, there are at least 3 or 4 kinds of reok. Traditional, more modern, contemporary, and they fight, they debate with each other. The thing is that they didn't have, until recently when the Director General of Culture went there and organized Indonesiana, a platform for cultural events, they did not have room, space to debate, to discuss these problems. I mean, they didn't talk about blood. They talked about sponsorship of a cigarette company, which is actually controversial. I mean, culture is still linked to education in Indonesia, and then if a cigarette company or tobacco company is sponsoring a cultural event, then it becomes a problem. But then again, this company has been a part of the ecosystem of the Ponorogo Reok groups for more than 30 years. They've always been involved. So then what's needed is, of course, a policy debate, whether we can create an exception, or I don't know, or a special case regulation or something like that. So the thing is that sometimes we look at cultural practitioners, people who have practiced traditions as they cannot help themselves, as if they cannot help themselves, as if they are lost in the modern world. Of course, they read papers, they look at, they watch TV, they hear radio, they are internet savvy. The thing is that to bring them on the same level as other people, experts, scientists, policymakers, so that then they can debate, they can discuss, and that's what's lacking, or has been lacking for a long time, especially in Indonesia.
Okay.
So that's my opinion. I mean, yes, there will be giant corporations with very, like huge powers in the rainforest in Sumatra, cutting trees and so on.
Yeah.
How to bring those people? Maybe in the court, but there are other venues to debate sustainabilities.
But first we need to start a dialogue.
Yes.
And understanding. And that's, I think, common across all the questions and answers, that we cannot just generalize.
Exactly.
We need to understand the local perspectives, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's data, or it is about special customs. So people-centric approaches in culture are very important. Let's take the next round of questions and be very precise. We can take 3 more. Who would like to? Okay, there is one over there. Satu lagi, number 2. And the last, if there is any. Okay, looks like these are the 2 questions, because we have roughly around 12 minutes, and if we are efficient in answering, we may take 1 or 2. So maybe the lady over there, please introduce yourself again.
Hello. Hello, my name is Injung Cho. I'm originally from Korea, but I'm currently a PhD student in Waseda University, Japan. And I'm researching about the marginalized children in Indonesia, especially who are living in the urban poverty and the education for them. So my question is, knowing the leave no one behind, like the goal of the UNESCO, and like having the Convention of the Rights of the Children, I would like to ask how marginalized the children, especially who are having the disabilities or living in the urban poverty, or like who are being refugees and immigrants, how can they participate and engage in such a practice of cultural heritage sharing?
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, very tough one. So, and now we have our dear colleagues here. Kindly introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Dolorosa Sinaga. I'm a sculptor. I would like to go back to Bagus.
Basuki. Bagus
Pak
Basuki.
Bagus. Pak Bagus.
Bagus Basuki.
Yeah. I think you and siapa namanya? What's your name again? I forgot.
Ikrom.
Alison. You two should have like long debate on, because one is the agenda is sharing knowledge, and the other one is not protecting, but sort of capitalistic approach to culture or identity. Now, Bagus, if you were given a chance to imagine and revitalize a discourse on intellectual property, in context with what we are discussing now, what would be the formulation of your knowledge on that intellectual property rights? Thank you.
Okay. So, okay, one more over there, gentleman. All right. So first, the young man here.
Thank you once again. My name is Luka Matic. I'm coming from Serbia, East Europe. I'm Dharmasisva student from STP Trisakti. Like my friend, she forgot to say she's from Dharmasisva as well. Yes. So my question is, since I come from Serbia, it's a small country, maybe not all of you know, in East Europe. And we also have a lot of culture, a lot of different traditional dances, a lot of different traditional instruments. And since we have a common history with neighboring countries, there are some countries who are like, we have similar clothes, similar traditional clothes, similar cultures and so. But like in many parts of the world, there are some tends to, I don't want to say bad, but like to steal each other culture, like to...
Is it bad to steal culture?
No, I don't mean, I don't, don't get me wrong, but one a good example is, for example, in Serbia, in Croatia, in Albania, neighboring countries, we have like some traditional instrument that is really similar. You know, like Serbians say it's our instrument, Albanians say no, it's our instrument. What should we do to stop those kind of fightings?
So nobody should steal it.
You know what I mean?
No,
like
there are issues of actually protecting like underwater cultural heritage.
Yes.
There are people who are actively stealing and making profits out of it. But the other question is how far this ownership goes, and that's also very important.
That's what I mean, yes.
Thank you very much. And we
Yes.
have one last one in the end. Where is that gentleman? Maybe, yeah. This will be the last because really we are running out of time now.
Thank you. My name is Yudi. I'm from Ministry of Culture and Tourism. My question is how, for the three of speakers, how you connect in the cultural advancement platform, as mentioned by Mr. Idam. In cultural advancement platform, according to the law number 5, 2017, how you make a connectiveness between the WTO, IP in the WIPO, and also in the UNESCO, and also in the view of, I think there's a similarity in the protection, in the terms of protection and preserving and safeguarding, and how you connect it. Because each speaker told about according to their point of view, but in the digital era, in the 4.4 industry, we cannot. We have to connect between the two instruments, and how the advancement of cultural law to connect within the platform of, for example, in the terms of Ministry of Culture and Tourism, especially for Mr. Idam Setiadi and maybe added by Mr. Basuki and Madam Edison. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much. So let's be very precise in answering. So I give 1 minute each, if that's okay. That's part of the intellectual property rights as well. So, Bagus Basuki.
Thank you. All of these are tough questions.
That's why I only give you 1 minute, so after that you can relax.
Let me think first. As I mentioned before, I think we could place intellectual property regime in a right place. I mean, based on the philosophy. As I have told you before, that even in even that experts on IP say that we have to avoid, for example, excessive property, for example. So there is a space for us to put the intellectual property right, to foster the cultural diversity. I cannot give you a detailed answer, but we can talk each other after this.
Yeah.
But I believe there is, in intellectual property concept, there is principles that could be connected to the cultural diversity. So I mean, we don't have to think too much that protecting intellectual property will means that we are going to be capitalistic. Because, for example, we cannot acknowledge, for example, we cannot recognize great paintings or great sculptures if you don't protect them with IP. Okay.
Okay, so it means
okay.
you need
That's
to
why
have
we can talk each other after this.
It means nasi goreng
Please.
together.
give me. Okay. We talk about it later. So I'm going to answer other questions because.
Yeah, please be very.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
There is no right or wrong. We have to reconcile with each other.
And about other questions, colleagues from Serbia. In WIPO context, now one of the issue being negotiated is about shared heritage between countries. So they also think about how we solve this problem, because for Indonesian context we also have the same problem like others with Malaysia and etc.
Yeah.
And then about this question, I think it's difficult. It's rather difficult to connect between WTO, WIPO, and UNESCO, because I don't say it is impossible, but because maybe most of us has been deeply dominated by the principles made in each organization. So sometimes we cannot.
The focus is different.
We cannot go out of the box. Whereas actually, WIPO tries to expand their effort to protect ITK entities in the WTO context, for example.
Yeah. But maybe there is more room at the national level,
Yes.
because you are dealing with all these conventions and
Yeah,
treaties
yeah,
and.
yeah.
So
In national level, we can
at
do
the national
that. We can
level,
do that.
you can
We can
integrate and
Yeah.
have innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Sure,
Professor
very
Suki. Alison, maybe you can deal with some of these global issues of leaving no one behind. Can you?
I'll try. Yes. I was thinking particularly with regard to the question about marginalized children. I mean, that it really is such an incredibly, really heartbreaking question in many ways when you think about some of the challenges and disadvantages that some of the most vulnerable in society face. And that's a really, really huge issue to deal with. I think it is interesting, though, when you look at things, and getting back to the topic of this conference, well-being, it's really interesting when you start to see things like, for example, I was talking to an economist from New Zealand just recently, and he was talking about the approach taken there, looking at, focusing on the family in indigenous communities, and the focus on the family and the focus on child health within the family, and also the focus on mental health. I think in many ways children, they don't need a lot in terms of material things, but they do need a lot of support, and you know, mental health is really, really important. And therefore I think that in terms of ensuring the possibility to engage with the with culture and retain a sense of cultural identity, this really has to come, I think, from completely changing the way in which you know, policies and politics and economics thinks about these things, so that you place the well-being of the most vulnerable at the center of what it is you're seeking to achieve at a national level. And that's really where I think the shift towards well-being economics is so vital. And it's so important also really to see the importance of culture within that, because let's face it, when you haven't got much in terms of material wealth, there's still an awful lot that can give you a sense that life is worth living. And that's really where culture comes in. I'm sorry to be so generalistic in that, but really it's such a big question.
It's about principles, cannot be prescriptive.
No.
No, cannot be.
And I also just wanted to make a small comment on one of the other questions that you were dealing with, the question about from Serbia, about, oh, how do we protect what's ours when just over there they've got something that looks really similar and we're not sure whether this is appropriation or not. And you know, one senses the entry of lawyers into the scene and IP rights and all the rest of it. I think that's really interesting. I think, though, that you could flip that around and start looking at, you know, what are the commonalities that we share and how can we build on those commonalities to actually create new culture, because everything comes from somewhere. You know, it's really about using it for creativity. And again, I very much appreciated the comments from my colleague here about the need for creating platforms for open debate and discussing that, and really not looking in a more protectionist way, but really in a way in how we can, you know, combine and find synergies and actually then use that as a stimulus for something new.
Thank you very much, Alice. I want to put my own questions to you, Dr. Idham. We have not really dealt with transboundary issues. Like, one of them is, of course, maybe this batik issue between Indonesia and Malaysia. Which one is better? We are in Indonesia today. Of course, Indonesian batik is better. But there are other transboundary issues in protecting heritage. And especially in natural heritage, there can be huge challenges in between the countries. And how do we create this environment where everyone is progressing together? How do we come over this question of the conflicts as well? So any insights from your work on nomination process? There are nominations which are also transboundary nominations. And World Heritage Principle is then the heritage belongs to the whole world. So in that regard, when it belongs to whole world and transboundary issues, and once we reconcile them, and building peace and getting over intellectual property in the more transparent way, is there any recipe Indonesia has found?
We are trying to. We haven't found it yet. But basically what's needed, I mean, is actually a paradigm shift, which is actually already happening in the global world. I mean, I saw it in your presentation, paradigm shift in ACROM. It's happening at the Association of Critical Heritage Studies all over the world. And it's also, I mean, where it actually should happen here in Indonesia and other parts of the world is actually in the bureaucracy itself. That the bureaucrats actually, as I tried to show, in 1920s it was possible for a Japanese diplomat to translate the vision of giants like Einstein and Bergson and so on, and then actually he was the one who coined the term of cultural diversity while talking about or trying to translate culture of peace. When he said that it is about the bricolage, it's not about molding everyone into one mold. So it's actually about the bureaucrats. I don't know what's happening in Serbia, but in Indonesia, more often than not, many times, it's actually the bureaucrats who make the hype about who does batik belong to, who does the Reok Ponorogo belong to. I mean, for the people in Ponorogo, there's no question about it. It's about Reok is Ponorogo. For the people who are working and as the artisans in batik production centers, there's no questions. It's Javanese. It's theirs. Whether it's also used in Malaysia, that's another question. But it's not about ownership. It is not. It's not about ownership. That's what we are trying to do in the Spice Roads nomination. It's about connections. It's about linking, how culture spreads. It's not originated in one person's mind. It's about interaction, and that's the paradigm shift, actually, which also maybe could answer the intellectual property question. But it needs, I mean, to come back to my beginning, to start of what I was saying, is it needs to also change the minds of bureaucrats. Very important, in my opinion.
And all the policymakers.
Policymakers, I mean, bureaucrats, also politicians.
So it's about people. So
it's about people, yes.
Yeah, it's about people. So thank you very much, dear colleagues. That's all the time we have. In a nutshell, what I can say, what I've gathered from these discussions is that we cannot generalize. There are conventions, there is work of standardizing at the global level where the nations meet together and they look into the principles which are about justice, equity, sharing ideas, creating peace, very importantly, and sustainable development. Come to the national level, we will be able to innovate because then we can meet the global standards with the national priorities. But then you need to go all the way to the community level. And there are customs, tradition, cultures, very, very important, which need to be resolved through dialogues and better understanding. We cannot be prescriptive about them. And that's the way, if we go back to the title of the session was, we are going to go beyond boundaries by sharing history, by safeguarding cultural diversity, and the diversity of the expertise as well. We need scientists, we need the archaeologists, we need the people who are better in education. We cannot avoid lawyers and economists. So with that, I thank you all. A big applause to my colleagues for wonderful presentation. Okay, we have somebody, because you did a wonderful job, so you will also get gold medals. So we have with us Pawan Yoga Swara, Head of Sub-Directorate for the Heritage and Cultural Diplomacy. So Pawan, give them the accolades. Thank you very much. So you have to stand up if you want one. Thank you very much. Well done. This looks good. History of batik. Is intellectual property protected? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, photo together. Sorry? Face here. All right. And our photo is IP protected.